everybody, it's Holly here today with a new video for MarkerPop. Today we're going to be creating this fun card using the new Tiki Time set from Newton's Nook, and I'm also going to be using the coordinating dies. I showed a similar card to this using a stamp set, the pineapple stamp set from Hero Arts a couple weeks ago, so I thought I would go ahead and do a video on how to do the technique. So we're going to start out using some Tim Holtz Distress watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to start out by inking the stamp up directly using the Distress ink pad, and then I'm going to go ahead and spritz it with the mini mister, and then I'm going to stamp right down onto the cardstock, and this is going to give a very I guess you would say bold, dark impression because it's coming right from the ink pad. And then I'm going to alternate, clean off my ink pad or my stamp, and then I'm going to alternate and use the marker of the same color, Rusty Hinge, and I'm going to color directly on the stamp, and then I'm going to spritz it again and then stamp down. And what this does is, because it's the same color, every line of distress, every product of stress in the same color gives you a different look, though. It might be a little darker, it might be a little lighter. So if you use the marker, you're going to get a little bit lighter. So this is another way to use your inks to the full potential without having to have a lot of colors. You can get dark and light from just one color. So I'm going to keep alternating this. I'm also going to be using Mowed Lawn and Picked Raspberry for the flower and the grass. And I'm just going to keep alternating between the pads and the markers. I will say, when you are spritzing your stamp, if you've inked directly from the pad, you want to spritz farther away, maybe just one spritz, because the ink from the pad kind of mushes up on the stamp immediately almost. And then when you're using the marker, you kind of get more fuller coverage. So when you spritz, you still want to spritz from a good distance, but you also maybe want to give one or two spritz. You kind of have to play with it to see what you like, and it's also going to be about what the technique is or what the look is you're going for. So I'm using Rusty Hinge for the Tiki Cup, and I'm just going back and forth between the marker and the ink pad like I mentioned, and it gives me two great different shades of that rusty orange color. And then the leaf is Mowed Lawn, and the little pink flower is Picked Raspberry. I didn't like the way the marker looked, so I kept using the ink pad, and then every time I stamped down, I spritzed, stamped, and then I cleaned my stamp off and started all over again, and I repeated it. So I went ahead and just kept doing that until I created a fun pattern on the back of the cardstock. And then once I had the pattern all set up to where I wanted it, I went ahead and heat set it with my heat tool, or you could set it aside to dry because the paper's kind of wet because you're adding so much water to it. And then I take a second piece of the Distress watercolor cardstock, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp some more images from the set. I'm stamping the Tiki individually, and then I'm going to stamp like the umbrella and the straw, the flower and a couple leaves, and I'm just using the markers and the pads to get the same effect. And these are the images I'm going to use on the front of the card as my main focal area. So I just went ahead and stamped those, and then once I have them all stamped, I'm going to go ahead and die cut them out using the coordinating dies. And then I'm also going to heat set that with my heat tool to make sure everything's nice and dry. I like to make sure everything's nice and dry before I run it through my bake shop machine so that nothing transfers onto my cutting plates that could come off later. And I'm actually pulling the colors that I'm using from the Doodlebug Fun in the Sun paper pad that we're going to be using. So once I have all that set, I went ahead and bumped the camera, but I die cut the image panel and a piece of the pattern paper using the Dynamics set there. This is Dynamics, what is this, Dynamics? It's the newer one that just came out. Blueprints 29, I think it is. It'll be in the description box below, but I use that to cut the image panel and then a piece of that pattern paper from the Doodlebug Fun in the Sun pack. And then I also used the little flag banner in there to stamp or die cut a piece of white cardstock. And then I'm using the stitch circle stacks to cut a piece of vellum, and then the coordinating dies to cut out the stamps. And then I'm taking the new fringe die from My Favorite Things, and I'm going to cut off the tips, the points where it comes to a tip, because I just want like a strip across. You could use fringe scissors, or I think there's a die that actually does this, but I don't have it, so this worked for me, just trimming up that fringe die a little bit. Reminding you of the tiki grass you see at the bottom of grass huts and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment from the set onto that little banner that I die cut from that Blueprints 29. And then I'm going to use some tape on the back. I think this is Be Creative tape is what this is, and I'm just using that on the back of my images, and I'm going to set them up how I want them on the little vellum circle to create my focal point. So I'm just adding everything behind it, and then I'm adding some foam tape. Now, if I were to do this again, I would add my images directly to the vellum circle, and then I would put my foam tape behind it to adhere the vellum circle to the card front, because it would raise the vellum up a little bit, and it wouldn't have, it would conceal the background a little bit better. But it is what it is, so this is what I did. Now, before I monkey around with the image panel, I'm going to go ahead and put it in a box. I have a box near my desk that I keep for spritzing and spraying. I'm going to use the Distress Spray in the brass, and I'm going to use the Black Soot Distress Paint. I'm going to put a little bit of that on a block, and you want to use a paintbrush, a wet paintbrush. And I'm going to go ahead and flick some of the color down onto the card front to create some spatters. This is where everything kind of went wrong. I had a couple blobs of the black soot on my card front, but don't freak out, don't worry about it. It's always going to be fixable because we're just going to hide it behind that vellum circle. And then I went ahead and added some of that brass distress stain, same way with the paintbrush. And then once that was done, I dried it with my heat tool to make sure everything was nice and dry. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the tape from that piece of fringe. I'm just going to line that up using the graph on my paper there on my desk. My very loved piece of paper. I don't know about you guys, but I use my graph paper till it can't be used anymore. So I'm going to line that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my vellum image piece there that I created with the foam tape and all my little pieces. Add some tape behind it. This is where I would have put the foam tape in the background, and I would have used that flat tape to put the images directly onto the, because that would sort of lifted the vellum up off the background a little bit more, and you wouldn't have been able to see the background through it as much. There is another card in the blog post for today that you'll be able to see what I'm talking about there. And then I'm going to take the pattern paper that we die cut, and I'm going to off-center that a little bit behind it. I had a piece of this regular little kitty foam on my desk. I'm going to use my ATG gun to put some tape on the back of that foam. I'm going to put that behind the main panel, and then I'm going to add some more foam, or more ATG tape, or no, Be Creative tape, to the back of the foam. I have found that the ATG tape is really good for using with this foam stuff here. And I'm using this foam because it's a little bit thinner than the 3D Scotch foam that I use, so I don't want like super thick card. And then I'm going to lay that on top of that pattern paper there. Now I'm going to take a piece of 110-pound Nina Solar White cardstock, and I'm going to cut it to A2 size, a top folding. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the front panel to the front of the card base. Now when you do something like this and you have an off-centered panel in the background, a tilted panel, I like to try to line up that main, like what part of that's going to be straight. So that's what you want to use to line up. And it's okay if your tilted panel hangs off the edges a little bit. And then for a little bit of sparkle, I'm going to go add some of the mixed sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Bosch and some Ranger Multi-Medium Matte. I love this mix because it comes in 10, 6, and 4 millimeters, and I like how there's all the different sizes in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and add those. Again, there is another picture of another card that I made using the same technique in the blog post for today, and you can see where that vellum sits up a little better. But I think it came out great. This is a really fun technique and a good way to use your distress markers. And you could also do this with the Zig markers, the Zig Clean Color markers. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.